John Money. This is a name everybody should know, but apparently very few do. He can be considered the very founder of modern gender theory and the trans movement, but is mostly based on a lie. This is a man whose work should theoretically be mentioned by feminists, but is largely ignored or swept under the rug due to the ethical and scientific controversies surrounding him. And when you're going to learn about David Reimer, everything will become very clear. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because if you type in John Money in Google, at first glance, nothing is out of the ordinary, but if you dig a little bit deeper, things start to become pretty disturbing. This is the story of John Money, the guy everybody should know about, but don't. John Money was born in 1921 in a small place in New Zealand called Morrinsville. Since nothing seemed out of the ordinary in his early years, I will fast forward a decade or two. Now, he immigrated to the United States in 1947 and received his PhD from Harvard University in 1952. John was a prominent psychologist and sexuologist, I think that's how it's pronounced. By the early 1950s, he finished his studies and was already starting to be famous for his new ideas. At Harvard, John spent a lot of time thinking about what makes boys boys and girls girls. He had a big new idea. Being a boy or a girl wasn't just about your body. He was among the very first people in history to take gender out of the normal grammatical class, such as noun, pronoun, adjective, or verb of a language, and then use it for people. Because before John Money, there wasn't any discussions about whether you had a gender or not. People had a sex, and that was male or female. But John Money didn't see it this way. Basically, he invented the idea that we have this psychological gender and that we were born gender neutral. This wasn't to say that he was oblivious to the fact that there were physical differences, but aside from that, Money's theory was also about what your family, friends, and institutions taught you, that whether you are masculine or feminine is imposed on you from society. And because he believed that gender is a social construct, he had this revolutionary idea that because you were born gender neutral, a boy could be raised as a girl and a girl as a boy. But a theory has to be put to the test to be proven, right? And so he did. And that happened with the experiment of David Reimer. But before I tell you that part of the story, you have to understand this part first. Well, Money believed that society starts teaching you how to act like a boy or a girl at a very young age. So your family, friends, and even TV shows tell you what toys to play with, how to dress, and how to behave. And obviously, there is some truth to this. We're obviously influenced by these things, especially as kids are easily manipulated. When he called this gender role, he said that this is how people learn to act their gender, not just because they were born that way. So in a nutshell, John Money thought being a boy or a girl isn't just about how you're born, but it's also about how society tells you to act. This is also what you could call a social construct, which is an idea that has been created and accepted by the people in a society. John Money was a professor of pediatrics and medical psychology at Johns Hopkins University from 1951 until his death. He made up the words as gender role and sexual orientation. By doing this, he became one of the very first people to talk about these ideas. Now, the words sex and gender have a long and intertwined history. In science speak, sex is focused on the biological aspect and is about if you're male or female based on your body parts. Gender has to do with how you feel and express yourself, like if you're masculine or feminine. What's interesting is that this separation is a 20th century thing, and as you might know, it's still a very, very hot topic and probably why you clicked on this video in the first place. But remember, while experts try to keep them separate, people often tend to blend the two together. So it's a very complicated topic and is why we have to keep talking about it. But let me just try and break it down for you plain and simple what gender and sexuality is. And just a quick disclaimer, I am no way an expert on this subject, but I will try my very best to explain it. When we talk about gender, there are many aspects to it, but in there is 3 major pieces to the puzzle, which is what I will be focusing on. You have sex, gender identity, and gender expression. The biological sex is a multi-dimensional biological construct based on anatomy, physiology, genetics, and hormones, and all animals, including humans, have a sex. Gender identity refers to a person's internal and individual experience of a gender, which may or may not correspond to their sex at birth. Gender expression is the way in which people show their gender identity, especially in the way they dress and behave. Now, sexuality is about your sexual feelings, thoughts, attractions, and behaviors towards other people. You can find other people physically, sexually, or emotionally attractive, and all those things are a part of your sexuality. Sexual orientation is a major part of one's sexuality. Sexual orientation is usually divided into these categories. I'll assume you know the first three, which is heterosexual, bisexual, and homosexual. And then there is pansexual, who are attracted to people of any gender identity, and then we have asexual, who are not sexually attracted to other people. When it comes to John Money, the silence around him is particularly troubling for modern-day feminism, which often champions the idea that gender is a social construct. But here's the catch. There's a reason not many people talk about him anymore. He did an experiment with someone named David Reimer that was supposed to prove he was right, but the experiment went terrible. John Money had big ideas, but ideas need to be tested. So he decided to do an experiment that would involve young kids, and in fact it involved infants. Now he wanted to prove that his theories were right, that being a boy or a girl was something society taught us, not just how we were born. But here's the thing, sometimes when people want to prove something really bad, they tend to make mistakes. Now David Reimer was born in 1965. He was originally named Bruce, and his identical twin was named Brian. For the sake of keeping things simple, I will keep calling him David. When David and his twin brother, Brian, were 6 months old, they were both diagnosed with phimosis, a condition affecting the foreskin. Eager to resolve the issue, their parents were advised to consider circumcision, a medical procedure with a history spanning over 15,000 years. But apparently their doctor, Dr. Hood, chose to stray from the traditional surgical method and used a riskier technique known as electrocauterization? It's called? I don't know. Anyways, this decision obviously led to a catastrophic outcome. The procedure failed, leaving David with irreversible physical damage. In contrast, Brian, who didn't undergo the surgery due to the initial disaster, naturally outgrew his phimosis without any medical intervention. As you can imagine, David's parents were heartbroken and confused. What should they do now? They had a boy without his manly body part. But that's when they saw John Money on TV talking about how babies could be raised as boys or girls. It seemed like an answer to their prayers, so they contacted him, and Money was thrilled. He thought this case could prove his ideas to the world. They took him to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore in the early 1967 to see John Money. David's parents trusted Money and decided to follow his advice. From then on, David was raised as Brenda, which was similar to his first name, Bruce. They gave David dresses, dolls, and even hormone treatments to make her more like a girl. Money kept close tabs on the case and even writing about it in scientific papers as a big success. But was it really though? During this time, estrogen was given to David during adolescence, inducing breast development. As David grew older, she felt something was deeply wrong. She didn't like the same things most girls did. She felt lost and unhappy. Even though Money told her parents that everything was going fine, Money kept saying, "Give it time, she will adjust." Okay, you think things are fucked up right now? Just wait till you hear this shit. It's true nightmare material. Because according to John Colapinto, who published a biography of Reimer in 2001, the sessions with Money included what Money called childhood sexual rehearsal play. Now, I obviously won't dive deeply into this in the case I get cancelled, but go look it up if you still believe John Money is a saint. But basically, it would involve things like the following. Starting at the age of 6, and I repeat, at the age of 6. According to Brian, the twins were forced to act out sexual acts, with David playing the female role. Money made Reimer get down on all four. Brian was forced to come up behind. And yeah, I think you get the idea, so I don't really feel like continuing because it's just fucked up and depressing. But if you're for some weird reason still is curious about what happened, you can go check that on his wiki page. At the age of 13 years, Reimer was experiencing suicidal depression, and he told his parents he would take his own life if they made him see John Money again. And I wonder why. Because when David turned 14th, the truth was revealed. David learned he was a boy, but raised as a girl. And so John Money's big experiment fell apart. David Reimer's story showed that John Money's big ideas had flaws and even bigger consequences. Money had thought he could play with nature, but nature had its own rules. After learning the truth, David Reimer transitioned back to living as a male, undergoing medical procedures to reverse some of the changes that had been made to him. But this transition was far from smooth. The strain of living a lie for years had taken its toll not just on David, but his entire family, especially his twin brother, Brian. David tried to move on, he got married and even adopted children, but the scars of Money's experiment were deep. David battled with severe depression and a sense of betrayal. But Money, on the other hand, refused to admit any wrongdoings and continued to consider his experiment a success, causing public outrage. As things weren't bad enough, David's twin brother, Brian, passed away suddenly from an overdose widely believed to be intentional. David was devastated. He lost the only person who'd shared his unique, painful journey, and probably the only one that could understand him. Losing his brother in 2002 was horrible, and on the 2nd of May 2004, his wife Jane told him that she wanted to separate. So on the morning of the 4th of May 2004, Reimer drove to a grocery store's parking lot in his hometown of Winnipeg and shot himself in the head with a sawed-off shotgun. He was 38 years old. John Money's experiment didn't just fail, it completely destroyed David and his family. This was his proof of concept, and John Money believed that it was a huge success. But I'll let you decide what you think of this. So why is it that no one talks about John Money, considering today's woke culture where gender debates are front and center? And if his ideas were so big, why don't you hear feminists and social justice advocates talk about him? Well, one of the problems is that, as you just learned, his experiment did real harm, especially to people like David Reimer, which was a child, and you don't mess with children. This makes him a complicated figure that many people, including feminists, would rather not bring up in debates. It's important to realize that this isn't just about choosing sides, but to become aware of the issues at hand. This is about understanding the essence of who we are and embracing it. Each of us is dealt a hand in life, and it's up to us to play those cards the best as we can. And I just want to state something very clearly. I don't harbor any animosity towards women. In fact, I cherish them. But the reality is, when we blur the lines too much between masculinity and femininity, we end up with a society where everyone is confused, lost, and unhappy. We're living in a world that seems to have forgotten the beauty of differences and therefore complementing each other, where men and women bring different but equally valuable qualities to the table. Listen, we're different, and that's okay. That is what makes us humans beautiful. So remember, the goal isn't to point fingers or win an argument. The goal is to improve, to be better, to understand, and to create a world where we all can thrive while being true to our nature. And that starts with each individual making the commitment to self-improvement and self-awareness. Now, if you like this video, just click the video on the screen. I promise you, I'm sure you're gonna love it.